Hello and welcome to another UKGN Network podcast. I'm Zoidberg and this week we've been celebrating the 20th birthday of the Sega Dreamcast. Released on the 14th of October 1999, this was Sega's fifth and final home console, and it kicked off the sixth console generation a full year before the arrival of the all-conquering PlayStation 2. It did so by introducing features that would go on to become industry standard, like joypad triggers and online gaming. The launch could definitely be considered a success too, with 185,000 units reportedly sold across Europe on the first weekend alone, which is more than either the GameCube or Xbox managed 3 years later. Being the first console of a new generation will have had a major contributing factor in those sales, as would the low asking price of just $199.99. It was the first console to come with a built-in modem, allowing for online gameplay, something that had existed in PC gaming for years. Console players were now able to compete against each other in the likes of Quake 3 Arena, and we also got the first online RPG in the shape of Phantasy Star Online. Sales of the console dropped significantly after the arrival of the PS2, and consequently Sega pulled the plug in 2001, going so far as to leave the console market for good to concentrate on games instead. To put that 2-year life into perspective, when the PS4 was 2 years old, Fallout 4 and Star Wars Battlefront were just being released. If it had ended right there, we'd have seen no Uncharted 4, no Horizon Zero Dawn and no God of War. And yet in its short lifetime the Dreamcast managed to play host to a number of genuine classic games. The likes of Soul Calibur, Jet Set Radio, Metropolis Street Racer, Skies of Arcadia, and of course the two Shenmue games were all exclusive releases for the Sega console, and those are just the well-known ones. Games like Bang-I-Oh, Outrigger and Starlancer all have their fervent fans too. In the years since its demise, the console has gained a bit of a cult following, particularly with fans of fighting games and bullet hell shooters. And because the game has no region lock, it's also become incredibly popular with collectors and importers. There's a huge library of games out there to discover if you dig deep enough and are willing to pay for them. However, we're going to focus on launch week and the 16 games that were available to choose from day one. Here's our list of the top 5 UK launch games for the Sega Dreamcast. Number 5. Pen Pen. We guarantee you've never played a racing game quite like Pen Pen. With its bright, colourful presentation, roll call of grotesquely cute characters, and strange rhythmic style gameplay. It's definitely not a game for everyone, and it will take a while before you really start to enjoy it. That was certainly true for us. Each race is a combination of 3 stages, making what the game calls a trill salon, where you swim, run and belly slide along the courses to victory. There's a large number of courses and characters to choose from, but you'll exhaust all the single player content in about an hour. The game doesn't really come into its own until you add more human opponents, and the split-screen gameplay supports up to 4 players. Other launch games were technically better than this, but the sheer oddness of Pen Pen makes it far more memorable. Number 4. Virtua Fighter 3 TB. No console launch lineup is complete without a great beat-em-up, and while Soul Calibur missed the UK launch by 2 months, we at least got Virtua Fighter 3 instead. Sega's fighting game series has always put more focus on well-timed attacks and counters over complex combos, and that makes each fight a tense and tactical showdown. Arenas come in all shapes and sizes, with some even seeing you fight on uneven ground, where it's possible to gain advantage by standing higher than your opponent. As you'd expect from AM2, the Dreamcast version is practically identical to the arcade original, with only a few colour differences here and there. The TB element of the title refers to the addition of Team Battle mode, where you can select 3 characters from the roster to take into the ring. It adds a nice extra element to what's already a great fighting game. Number 3. Sonic Adventure. The image of Sonic the Hedgehog running through the Emerald Coast pursued by a killer whale was one of the iconic images of the Dreamcast launch, and it marked the first time Sonic Team had attempted a full 3D Sonic game. Sonic Adventure is not a perfect game, featuring long sections where it's not entirely obvious what you're supposed to do next, but it features more than enough of what you'd expect from the series. It's divided up into 2 distinct sections. Adventure stages require mild puzzling and exploration, whereas action stages deliver the high-speed platforming that you expect, without any of the pitfalls that ruined many of the 3D Sonics later on. It's not a long game, clocking in at just over 2 hours, and the sequel is a lot better, but it's a game designed to be played over and over with multiple characters to try out and alternate routes to discover, and that's the reason it makes our list. Number 2. Sega Rally Championship 2. It was always going to be an uphill struggle for Sega Rally 2 to match its peerless predecessor, and if it doesn't quite manage it, that says more about how great the original was than anything else. This game makes wholesale improvements on the one area that the first game was lacking: content. In addition to a faithful recreation of the arcade version, there are 16 tracks to race, as opposed to just 3 in the original, and a full 10-year championship mode to keep solo players busy for ages, as well as a decent split-screen 2-player mode. The handling feels perfect with a good selection of rally cars to choose from, and tracks that all offer plenty of opportunities to shave valuable seconds off your times. This is exactly the type of arcade racer that we wish people still made, and it makes us sad that they don't. Number 1. Power Stone. If you look back into Capcom's extensive library of fighting games, Power Stone stands out with its fully 3D arenas and multi-level gameplay. Each one of the 10 available characters has the ability to pick up and throw objects around the levels, and it's a huge amount of fun to experiment with what's possible in the environment. 2-player versus matches are essentially a mad dash to collect the 3 Power Stones as quickly as possible before your opponent, as this grants you extra attack strength for a short time, although there are plenty of weapons that appear randomly throughout the battles as well. Considering how much Capcom likes to remake and re-release their old classics, we're surprised that Power Stone Collection on the PSP is the only time that the series has reappeared in the last 20 years, as the gameplay remains just as fun today as it was back then. Moving on to the latest releases now, with this week's reviews. We've had to wait almost an entire console generation to get a new game in Codemasters' Grid franchise, which is too long in our book, but the wait has definitely been worth it. While it proudly claims to be an arcade racer, it must be stressed that we're talking more in the realm of Project Gotham Racing than Outrun. Real cars on real tracks is the order of the day, and you'll get to drive everything from minis to open-wheel racers, with all the different handling quirks that you'd expect. The number of different racing styles and disciplines across the extensive career mode helps to keep the game fresh, even after many hours of play. The Ego engine has once again produced a fantastic looking game too, running at a solid 60 frames a second at all times, regardless of how much rain, smoke or debris is flying around the screen. At the end of the day, if it all feels a little familiar, that's because the original game was so great in the first place. Grid 2 was a disappointment because its structure was all over the place, and by tightening the focus, Codemasters have ensured that this is the year's most essential racer. We're big fans of games that offer something a little different, and from the moment Concrete Genie was revealed by Sony almost 2 years ago to the day, it's been sat on our most wanted list. The aim is to bring back life to the drab fishing village of Denska, while avoiding the town bullies who have scattered your scrapbook pages all over, and you do this by painting living murals onto every wall you can find. Each surface just begs to be painted with a decent amount of colourful designs without being overwhelmed by choice. The motion controls for the painting were clumsy at first, but increasing the sensitivity had us feeling really connected to the game. The greatest achievement though is the fact that even though you don't have to create immense pieces of art to move forward with the story, you'll want to. The only real criticisms are that the sudden shift in style in the game's final chapter felt like a different game entirely, and there are some noticeable frame rate issues, particularly when the camera is turning, but there's nothing that will distract you from an otherwise excellent game. Valfaris is a game that we got an early sample of at last year's EGX, and we've been waiting to get our hands on the full, glorious, brutal run-and-gun shooter ever since. With pixel artwork inspired by hundreds of heavy metal album covers, and a soundtrack to match, the hero even does some headbanging and air guitar when a new weapon is picked up. It's a tough but fair shooter, with enemy patterns that are possible to learn with practice, and the levels are spiced up with mini-bosses and horde onslaughts on a regular basis in order to keep you on your toes. The artists have really gone to town with the environments, which are all fantastically detailed with creature design to match. Your arsenal consists of 2 guns and a sword, all of which can be upgraded or swapped out as you progress. Learning which weapons are best for any given encounter is all part of the fun. With Blazing Chrome and now this, it's been a great year for fans of arcade shooters. It's available now on PC and Switch, with Xbox and PS4 versions coming in November. Make sure you check it out. Only a few weeks ago we talked about how it's possible to make a decent game from a movie license with just a little effort, and then along comes Zombieland Double Tap Road Trip from High Voltage Software, which is the complete opposite. This is a cheap and lazy twin-stick shooter which looks like a PS2 game, and one where the developer's budget clearly didn't stretch to licensing the voices or likenesses of the film's cast. The 4 characters all play identically, with the exception of a single special move, but the player movement is painfully slow and the special weapons run out of ammo far too quickly. Quite how they expect people to pay £35 for this and be happy about it is anyone's guess, but this would feel overpriced at half that amount. Save your money and go and watch the film instead, at least that looks fun. Now it's time for something a bit different with our Retro Game of the Week. We said recently that Sega needed to start releasing some more obscure titles in their Sega Ages range, and then up popped Ichidant-R on the Switch. It's a little known arcade game from 1994, and the second in a series of competitive puzzle spin-offs from Bonanza Brothers that began with Tant-R. Previously, only the arcade version was released anywhere outside of Japan, although you'd have been lucky to find one, and this new release allows you to play that as well as the Japanese-only Mega Drive conversion. Think of it as Sega's answer to Bishi Bashi Special, where two players battle it out to solve a series of puzzles against both each other and the clock. There's a nice variety to the puzzles, although some of the time limits seem a little tight, and it has a charming visual style. M2 have done their usual great job of providing different scanline and smoothing options for the authentic arcade experience. It's definitely an enjoyable way for you and a friend to spend a couple of hours. Which wraps up another edition of our show. We hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to tell us your memories of the Dreamcast in the comments and what your favourite games were. We'll be back next week with a ghoulish Halloween special featuring reviews of the week's new releases, including Plants vs Zombies Battle for Neighbourville. Don't forget you can follow us on social media at UKGN Network to see what we're playing and talking about. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye for now.